Alright, I know what you're thinking. Why are we talking about AGER'S SCEPTER now? Well, two reasons. One, I've never formally reviewed AGER'S up to this point. We've talked about it in the context of a build before, but no standalone weapon breakdown. Two, a stasis-focused season should be in the pipeline. We haven't caught a whiff of stasis in the seasonal artifact during the first two seasons of the Year of Lightfall. Every other elemental type has been in there in some capacity at this point. Maybe I'm reading the trends wrong, but it does feel like we're due. So I figured, why not dust off AGER'S ahead of time, get all the pertinent information updated, so when stasis does come to the surface, we can hit the ground running. Starting out with the stats and perks. AGER'S SCEPTER is an exotic Stasis Trace Rifle firing at 1,000 rounds per minute with 97 rounds in the magazine. The stats are pretty much what we'd expect to see on a trace rifle. Solid range, great stability, acceptable handling and reload speeds, top marks and aim assist, and a maxed out recoil direction of 100. Our intrinsic trait here is AGER'S Call. Final blows with this weapon generate a slowing burst around the defeated target. The exotic perk on this weapon is Rega's Refrain. Stasis final blows transfer ammo to the weapon's magazine from reserves. Then the exotic catalyst, which is a big feature on this weapon, grants AGER'S access to the Will Given Form buff. Now the text description here is pretty chunky because there is a good bit going on. I'm not going to read it word for word because we are going to test all this stuff out coming right up, but the gist of it is you're trading your super to amp up the weapon. Lastly, if you have not acquired this weapon yet and it does sound like something that you'd be into, it is available for direct purchase at the exotic weapon kiosk located near the Tower Vaults. But you must have paid access to the Beyond Light content. Now, if you ask me, it's pretty filthy keeping weapons locked behind the paywall of a 2-year-old DLC. If there's anything that we've learned over the years though, is that Bungie's monetization practices, as shady as they may be, are non-negotiable in their eyes. But I want to remind you, and it's important that you hear this issue has nothing to do with the boots on the ground employees working on Destiny. These are attached to the strings being pulled from the big office on the top floor. And unless you got $3.6 billion sitting in the bank to get their attention, these are people you're probably never going to hear from. So for f***'s sake, treat the game devs and community managers like decent human beings. I'm sure every single one of them is just as, if not more passionate about Destiny 2 than we are. But I'm sure there's many situations where things that they want to do or things that they want to say aren't things that they necessarily can do or can say, at least if they want to keep their jobs. And sorry about the tangent, I just wanted to say my piece. Let's move on to a more positive note. Functionally, what exactly is AGER'S SCEPTER offering? First off, on kill, downed enemies emit the stasis burst. This does have a pretty impressive 10-meter working radius, and in PvE, it will hard freeze enemies. Then the Rega's Refrain perk works in a very similar way to Subsistence. But instead of just working off the weapon itself, any stasis-related kill puts 10 rounds back into the magazine. Even a stasis heavy weapon will do the trick here. Now onto the catalyst. When your super meter is full, and only when your super meter is full, pressing and holding the reload button will proc Will Given Form. This is going to consume your super, draining it from full to empty in around 20 seconds. During this window, if you stow your weapon, reload your weapon, or long press reload again, it will cancel the buff. Any undrained super energy will remain though. In return for using your super, on activation, your magazine size will instantly overflow to 194 rounds, provided you have that many bullets left in reserves. The beam from AGER'S will now directly apply 5 slow stacks for each round landed, so landing roughly 20 shots can secure an outright freeze. And on top of that, you'll see about an 80% boost to weapon damage, which we'll be taking a look at once we get into our testing. For the reload speed, we are looking at a pretty decent 1.92 seconds, and for the ammo reserves, at base, 435, 1 Stasis Reserves mod, 495, 2 copies, 544, and with 3 copies, which I wouldn't recommend because you're getting a substantially smaller jump, 568. With that, let's get into some damage numbers, but my general disclaimer first.
PvE damage numbers are variable and will change depending on content scaling or enemy tier. I've been doing all of my recent testing in the Spire the Watcher dungeon at the Aklos encounter to collect more relevant data versus a wider spectrum of enemies while still keeping things consistent from video to video.
In its base form, AGER'S is hitting Aklos for 1,677 points of damage on a crit. So maximum damage in its 97 round magazine comes in at 162,669. I have the time to empty clocked in at 6.39 seconds for a single mag damage per second of 25,457. For a point of comparison, I was curious to see how this measured up against a legendary trace rifle. So how about my favorite, Path of Least Resistance. At base, we're seeing crits land for 1,290, so just right there, AGER'S is dealing 30% more damage. Even if I allow my roll to make full use of triple tap and volt shot, while the maximum damage output is better thanks to the jolt hits and the inflated magazine size with triple tap, It still does come up a little bit short of AGER'S in the DPS department. When you proc Will Given Form though, AGER'S turns into a whole different beast. The crit damage jumps to 3018, but we also start seeing shatter damage at 8535. This will occur 9 times if we make full use of the overflowed magazine. Totaling both out, that puts the max single mag damage at 662,307. Time to dump all 194 rounds comes in at 12.8 seconds, with the single mag damage per second coming in at 51,743, which definitely can eclipse the damage output of some heavy weapons. And if you're curious as to how things play out as we drop down through the enemy tiers, single shot damage for minors and majors is on screen as well. Moving from boss to major, we get about 13% more damage, and it's a little more generous when going from major to minor, where we're dealing roughly 30% more. So do with that information what you will, I just kinda like seeing the full scope broken down. In terms of AGER'S performance, this is a weapon that covers a lot of bases quite well. As we just saw, the damage output is solid. And while I always knew it was dealing a bit more damage than a legendary trace rifle, I didn't realize it was a full 30%. And I mean, that's a pretty significant discrepancy. And with Will Given Form procced, while it's not going to rival our top heavy weapon options, with the right setup around it, it can pour on the damage and exceed expectations of what a special weapon should be outputting. And the cancel any time feature is quite nice if you wanted to use it to, say, melt down a champion and then carry on. It gets the job done, you get to conserve a good bit of your super meter, and hopefully it's back up momentarily for the next time you need to make use of it. Then, ad clearing. AGER'S is great at that too. The large 10 meter stasis burst can leave even not so tightly grouped packs of enemies completely petrified. That leaves them open for an easy shatter cleanup, limiting the need to put rounds on each target, hence conserving special ammo. Then, the range is pretty solid, which we'll take a closer look at in the PvP section, stretching out to what I would consider extended mid-range. Ease of use is high too. This is a very stable, place the reticle, hold the trigger weapon. The influx of bullets into the magazine through the Reg's Reframe perk can limit reload downtime, while vicariously boosting the weapon's magazine size. On top of all that, AGER'S can effectively deal with all 3 champion types. In its base form, it is more indirect. A collateral freeze and a shatter of an unstoppable champion will stun them. And since that stasis burst is actually applying slow stacks to secure the freeze, downing an enemy next to an overload champion will disrupt them. With Will Given Form though, now the beam itself becomes a direct way of dealing with the 2 aforementioned champion types. And then barrier champions. While the weapon doesn't carry the intrinsic ability to pop their shields, if you jump on them with Will Given Form active, they're basically freeze locked. The constant freezing and shattering won't give them a chance to deploy their shield. So if you can get them singled out, it's a pretty easy melt in most content tiers. Plus, subclass synergy. AGER'S is very good at doing stasis, allowing it to unlock increased access to numerous different aspects and fragments in our stasis subclass kits. The biggest drawback though, is that to use AGER'S to its fullest potential, it is going to cost you your super. Now me, I basically play Warlock full time. I can do without Winter's Wrath in PvE. But if you feel like you do get a bigger benefit from your super, or you just love casting it sheerly because of the power fantasy, using a weapon that wants you to consume it for a damage boost can be a deal breaker. And I get it. Destiny's a video game. Always prioritize your version of fun above everything else. And you do get the most bang for your buck when using AGER'S on a stasis subclass. And that's not to say you couldn't find some niche synergy with the other ones, but I mean, if stasis really isn't your thing, you might not hold this weapon in such high regards. Aside from that, other than the I prefer a different exotic point, I'm kinda running out of negative things to say here. AGER'S is a weapon with great utility and strong damage for what it is, and I've used it everywhere over the past few years. From baseline BS content up through Grandmasters, with the right pieces around it, AGER'S holds up extremely well. On to PvP, and like I said in my Queenbreaker review, I'm really not engaging with this side of the game currently. So I'm just not going to try to speak knowledgeably about how AGER'S is holding up in the current sandbox. But I did the testing and ran the numbers, so you have it at your disposal. And just to let you know, I did run through each resilience tier, taking things one shot at a time to give you a more accurate rounds to kill. And this did allow me to hone in more precisely on how much each shot is actually dealing. In-game, crits are showing for 17, and body shots are hitting for 13. I figured those being a lot closer to 16.7 on a crit and 12.5 to the body. And because the crit and body shot damage are so tight numerically, we got some resilience breaks. In terms of the optimal time to kill though, they're not gonna move the needle. We're looking at 0.73 seconds and 12 shots up and down the board. At the highest resilience tiers, it is gonna require 12 crits to hit that kill speed, but it does get more forgiving as we work our way down, either 11 and 1 or 10 and 2 at the mid resilience tiers. And on the low end, that being tier 3 or less, you can drop him with 9 crits and 3 bodies. And I did fetch you a 50-50 suboptimal time to kill here. 7 crits and 7 bodies can down any resilience tier in as quick as 0.86 seconds. For a pure body shot time to kill, you're looking at 1 second with 16 shots landed versus Guardians running tier 3 resilience or higher. Versus Guardians running tier 2 or less, it will require 1 less shot. 0.93 with 15 rounds landed. For the optimal range, we will be hitting for full damage from up to around the 35 meter mark. You step back to like 35.5, 36, that's where we do see damage fall off begin to occur. Now, if you burn your super to proc the Will Given Form damage buff. Crits and body shots show for 31 and 23 respectively. True values, I figured 30.3 and 22.8. That can give you an optimal time to kill as quick as 0.4 seconds. Versus tier 9 resilience or higher, you'll need 6 crits in 1 body. Tier 8 or lower, you can go 5 and 2. On body shots, if you do land 9 rounds, you can down your opponent in 0.53 seconds. Applicable versus all resilience tiers. For the stasis burst that occurs on kill, this is not going to hard freeze Guardians like we saw it doing to PvE enemies. It applies 50 slow stacks which fall off in about 5 seconds. So you'd have to hit an enemy target with 2 of these bursts in rapid succession to actually secure the freeze. But as we talked about in the PvE section, it does have a 10 meter working radius, so that might not be completely outside the realm of possibility, especially in our 6v6 game modes. And let's see how AGER'S performs against a couple supers. Versus a Cloak Spectral Blade, 25 crits technically can down the target in about 1.67 seconds. Probably safer to figure for 2 seconds though, factoring in a couple body shots. Versus Guardians in a well, I would say the best play is to not challenge it with the base fire mode. 51 rounds barely worked half of Mrs. Ironworker's overshield off. With the Will Given Form buff though, it only took 14 crits in 0.86 seconds to down the Spectral Blade, and it was able to knock Mrs. Ironworker out of the well in about 1.73 seconds, needing around 26 crits. So if you do want to take this weapon in the PvP, Godspeed, you at least have the information now. But all in all, over the last couple years, AGER'S has been one of my favorite weapons. It's a very rare occurrence that I hop on Shadebinder without bringing it along. And while I haven't got to use it much as of late because Stasis wasn't the flavor of the month, I did really enjoy getting it back in my hands. And I am quite excited to put it back to work again when Stasis pops up as a supported element in the seasonal artifact. But that's going to do it for this one. If you did end up enjoying the video, please remember to leave it a like. And if you're not already, feel free to subscribe to the Ironworker Gaming channel to catch more of my upcoming Destiny 2 content. But with all that being said, you guys are awesome, and I will catch you on the next one.